Hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the What's Up Wednesday, Video Game Collections in Libraries, Part 2, Processing, Cataloging, and Displaying, and Best Practices webinar with Chris Baker, Public Library Consultant, Games and Learning Consultant with the Library Services Team of the Wisconsin Department of Education, or Public Instruction, Jenna Giles, Youth Services Associate at the Chippewa Falls Public Library, and Jamie Hein, Library Director at the Clintonville Public Library. This webinar is being co-sponsored by the American Library Association's Games and Gaming Roundtable. My name is George Bergstrom, and I'm the Southern Regional Coordinator for the Indiana State Library's Professional Development Office. I'll be the question moderator for today. I'd like to start off the webinar with a few quick announcements. To register for other webinars or other trainings available from the Professional Development Office, please see the Indiana State Library's events calendar, which can be found on our website at www.in.gov/library. The session is 1 hour, so you will get one LEU for today. If you are watching the archived recording of this webinar, the instructions on how to obtain your LEU are available in the video description on YouTube. Or you can find those instructions on the Indiana State Library's continuing education site under the LEU policies. I'll now turn it over to Chris, Jenna, and Jamie.
Thank you so much, George, Lisa, Indiana State Library, for hosting us. We are seriously, amazingly honored to be here, and it's such a pleasure to see all you joining us here today, as well as those of you who will be joining us in cyberspace in the future as you watch this on YouTube or wherever it ends up landing. Just want to make sure, for starters, people can still see my screen. Thumbs up. Yeah, groovy. All right. So as George mentioned, today we're going to be talking about processing, cataloging, displaying, and best practices when it comes to video game collections in libraries. George already gave us a really great overview of who we are, but just as a reminder, my name's Chris Baker. I'm a public library consultant and games and learning consultant with the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. I'm specifically on the library services team for the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. DPI, as we call the Department of Public Instruction, is our state education agency, and the library services team serves as our state library agency. So tell us a little bit more about you, Jenna.
I am Jenna Gilles. I'm the Youth Services Associate at the Chippewa Falls Public Library.
I am Jamie Hein, and I'm the Library Director at the Clintonville Public Library.
So one of the reasons why I think it's really cool that we're all here today is that, myself as a former working public librarian, Jenna doing her part and Jamie doing his part, we're going to be offering different types of experiences when it comes to how we might approach things like processing, cataloging, displaying, and best practices. So there is going to be some overlap, but you're also going to get a fire hose of information today about some different strategies and pathways that you might want to take when it comes to getting your game and making it shelf ready and all the considerations therein. If you haven't seen this first, we might recommend that after you've watched this today, or if you're watching this in YouTube land, pause this and go watch part 1 first, where we talked about the why, what, and how of selection and acquisition. So you understand kind of strategies for getting your games in your libraries and to make those decisions and those choices. And then today we'll help supplement that as to getting them on your shelves. So we're going to be covering a lot of stuff today. And again, you're just going to hear a lot of examples that hopefully gives you some pathways to guide your decisions in your libraries, because you're going to know your library spaces best. You're going to know what resources and different pathways you have to be able to do this. So really, this is just going to be some vignettes, some examples that give you some pointers and maybe get you started. But we're going to be going over processing your games after purchase, labeling them, stickers, actually getting them shelf ready in a library space, cataloging video games, so how you might go about adding them to your ILS, how you might consider applying borrowing rules, fines, fees, etc., the rating systems and displaying video games, which is going to be a really big philosophical piece to this. And we're going to talk a little bit about intellectual freedom when it comes to games in library spaces. And then finally, we'll do some overview of maybe checkout procedures that you might want to consider for your staff. So with that in mind, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Jenna, to start us off talking about processing.
Thank you, Chris. So after video games arrive to the library, they immediately go to our tech services staff, who catalogs and processes all items before they come back to me, where I'll look them over and change them from in processing to available status. And there are a few additional things that I do that Tech Services doesn't do, which I will explain shortly. So Chippewa Falls Public Library is part of IFLIS, which covers about 10 counties and 53 libraries in western and northern Wisconsin. Currently, a little over half of the libraries in our system have Switch games available to patrons, similar numbers for Wii games. Less than half have PlayStation and/or Xbox games. About 10 libraries that I know of have various consoles that people can borrow in-house or check out and take home. Our ILS is Sierra, and we use BiblioCommons for our catalog. Chris, can you briefly explain what Wisconsin library systems are? Quick.
Yeah, for sure. So just a reminder to those who weren't maybe here in the first webinar too, Wisconsin has a pretty unique library ecosystem in the sense that we've got 15 different quasi-governmental library systems that represent different regions and have different counties within them in Wisconsin. And those library systems each have their own HQs, consultants. They may do things differently in terms of having different ILSs. They may have different guidelines and best practices. And so similar to if you're out there and you're part of your own consortia versus another consortia in your region, there are some differences in the way that we approach things both regionally, and then we also still offer statewide borrowing and of resources. So Jamie belongs to a different library system than Jenna. When I was in my public library in Portage, Wisconsin, I was in the South Central library system. We had a different ILS than, for example, Jenna and Jamie have. So just bearing that in mind, that there are some differentiations, and that will change how we might approach video game collections.
Thank you. So we process our game discs very similarly to our DVD collection. The disc and the cover art are transferred to locking DVD cases. Each disc gets a hub label and tattle tape. These are ordered through Demco. The barcode goes on the top front of the case, and each case gets a spine label. Most games that we added to the collection in 2024 came from Friends of the Library funds. So inside those cases, we're putting purchased by Friends of the Library stickers, and we just use an address label to make those up. A contents label is affixed to the outside front of the case. Tech Services tries to put them in a similar location each time for continuity, but they're also really good at keeping any important information or details that's on the cover art visible. But as we all know, sometimes this can't be avoided. Next slide, please. Thank you. Our Switch games take a little bit more work for processing due to how we display these, which I'll explain more in detail as we go on. So we use permanent marker to write CFPL, Chippewa Falls Public Library, on the Switch cartridge itself. Same as the discs, each gets a barcode on the case, spine labels, contents labels, and then the 2024 games get that Friends of the Library sticker inside. Next slide, please. So after that, Tech Services brings the games back down to my desk, and I work my magic. I scan the Switch cover art into my email. I upload those images to Canva to create the fake cases that are out on the floor. I have templates already made up in Canva to the DVD case size, so it really doesn't take me long to plop and crop the images, add the game's title, and then print them up. The fake case clearly states case is empty and instructs the patron to take it to the front desk. And also, just as a side note, I have talked with someone who knows more about copyright stuff than I do, and they said that there shouldn't be any issues for how I go about doing this because nobody's buying them, et cetera, et cetera. I've also shared my templates with you. You're welcome to make a copy and then borrow, steal, adapt, evolve, whatever works for you. Next slide, please. So once all of that is printed, I trim the paper and then slide it into a reused non-locking DVD case. Because we do use the locking DVD cases, we have a whole bunch of DVD cases just sitting around. And if your library is anything like mine, you rarely throw anything away. So we're reusing those in a wonderful way. If there's any confusion about the process, there's also a case is empty sticker inside the case. So when people open it up, there's no cartridge. So it's very, very handy. So typically I can knock these out pretty quickly, and I try to work on this during times I know the desk isn't busy. I'm at a public facing desk probably about 90% of the time, unless I'm in a meeting or in a program. And I like to just bloop, get it all done in one fell swoop. So the last batch of 7 games took me about 18 minutes total to scan, make it in Canva, print, trim, et cetera, et cetera. I've got a fairly efficient system in place. Everything I need is at my desk, and it works really well. Next slide, please. So it doesn't happen often, but sometimes games come with maps or directions or other inserts, and we follow the same process that we have when other library items have additional pieces. Tech services notes it in the catalog. If a piece might be additionally tricky to notice or catch, a pop-up message in Sierra is also added to the record. And then also each contents label has what is inside. I'll highlight anything out of the ordinary so it stands out a little better, as you can see in the picture there. The insert itself is also labeled with Chippewa Falls Public Library, and then whatever else fits, whether it's the call number or the last 4 digits of the barcode. Some inserts are also given a little extra reinforcement with book tape or getting laminated or what have you. I'm almost done. One last slide from me, please, Chris. So Ellie Phillips Memorial Public Library in Eau Claire gave me permission to share some details about their collection. They do things a little differently than we do. This is just one more example that we want to share with you that might work for your library. So their case artwork is transferred to a lockable DVD case for uniformity and to prevent theft. Staff place a plastic sleeve inside the case, and that's where the cartridge is kept. They do not separate cartridges from the cases due to staff time and limited storage at the circulation desk, whereas we do have that capability at our library. They also have a lot of self-checkouts at the Eau Claire Library too, so it would be harder for them to manage. And then they also use RFID tags. Now I'm going to turn it over to Chris, who's going to briefly cover a few things for us.
Thank you so much, Jenna. Yeah, so one of the things that Jenna touched on that I really want to lift up here is, so you got your games, you're at your desk, you're cracking them open, and you're ready to start processing them, adding labels and tags or whatever. But oh no, you open it up and you see there's a bunch of random stuff inside in addition to the game. This can take a couple of different shapes. And so inserts that'll be in the case after you purchase them can be different types of things. I'm going to break these into 2 sort of general different categories here that I would call inserts generally versus value added items that you could consider a multi-part of a game when you start processing it and offering it. So oftentimes the inserts will be these little sheets. I kind of have some examples right here that might be promotional inserts for other games. Hey, you bought this game, but check out this game as well. They may offer a code for bonus content or exclusive DLC where you get to download and add 1 extra level to your game, or it might be a code that unlocks extra skins in the game for a gun or for a armor or whatever, right? Sometimes these are even different inserts that might be dependent on the vendor. So like Walmart have its own inserts versus GameStop versus Amazon, whatever, that kind of stuff too. All of those things I recommend you just throw away. Those are going to be often one-time use only, so only one person gets to use the code to redeem it. In addition to that, I don't know that they add much value in terms of the content of the game or even like expanding upon the game experience for anybody. So those are types of things that I think are often going to be more finicky, more trouble than they're worth, and don't really add anything to the game. That I would differentiate between maybe value-added items. So like Jenna mentioned, you might also, though, open it up and not just little inserts, random promo things, there might be instruction manuals or maps that have the in-game world, lore and world building booklets or art and design booklets that might accompany the game. Now, this is still, your mileage may vary. This might be your decision whether or not you want to deal with this and add it or not. However, if it is a value-added item, there could be worthwhile to, like Jenna mentioned, reinforce it, add some labeling, and understand that maybe it's going to get damaged or lost. That can happen with these things, right? It's part of the wear and tear of circulating items. But that could also add more finicky pieces in terms of if you want to add it into the ILS as a multi-part item and say one disc, one booklet, etc. It might be more for staff to check in about. It obviously can be more for patrons to have to consider when they're checking it out or checking it back in. So it's just your mileage may vary. This is for your determination in your library space, but there could be value in actually adding these pieces as multi-part items to accompany the game when it circulates. Go ahead, Jamie.
Okay. Yeah, here in Clintonville for processing, our technical services is a one-person team, and we in Clintonville are a part of the Outagamie Wapaka library system, and we use the library corporations, or TLCs, Carl as our ILS. When games come in for us, we don't do like game comes in, we take off that plastic, put some labels on it, barcode, that sort of stuff, and it's out there. There isn't any sort of changing cases or any locking cases or any of that sort of stuff. Spine labels, you can see some examples of how our spine labels look and such. And this is using, on the example here, a zebra spine label printer. We've had that for years. We bought that through our library system, and it's worked very well for us in terms of making spine labels. One of the weird things with TLC's Carl is we're kind of limited in how much we can put on the spine labels. So we try to be pretty judicious in how we want to put text on there and such. Next slide, please. And so then this is some more examples of kind of, some of the processing that we do before the games go out. The example on the left is kind of getting into the multi-part items sort of thing, where on the back of the cases, we'll put a barcode in the upper right, and then right below that is a green little sticker that'll say check for blank items, in this case, 2 items. And, we put that in all sorts of items as well. One of the things I want to point out with the multi-part here with this specific example is The Last of Us Part 2 on the PlayStation 4 comes like the 2 items things is that there's 2 discs in the case. And kind of how that works is that one disc is a install disc, and on there it should say like install disc, put disc in first, and this is what installs the data onto the console. Then there will be a second disk on there that'll say play disk, and it should say something in there about put this disk in second. And this is basically once it installs, hey, this is the disk you put in to actually play the game. This is something to just kind of point out because there are some games that have come in multiple disks that maybe you want to highlight in some way to make it clear to your patrons like, hey, this is the first disk you want to put in case someone comes back and goes, hey, this didn't work. Did you try the install disk first? Something like that. So the other part that we do for processing, specifically for PlayStation and Xbox for the discs, we put a hub label on those discs that have our library name, our phone number, and kind of a little warning that says like, hey, if you damage this, you're probably going to have to pay for it. And these labels we get through Demco, and you can customize them how you want. So they, it can look a little bit different, or, customize the information you want to put on there. And for Switch games, we use a Sharpie to put our initials for our library, which says CPL. That usually just kind of sticks on there. Any sort of other sort of manuals or maps or anything like that, we'll add those as other items. So they would be part of the check for a blank amount of items. And we'll usually just put an ownership stamp that says Clintonville Public Library on there so that hopefully someone can see that and go, oh, this isn't ours. It needs to go back to the library. So, and then we'll pass it on to Jenna.
Thank you. So on to cataloging games. All video games are kept and displayed in the adult collection in our library, so they're coded adult. But don't let this confuse you because anyone is able to borrow or play the games. The I-type is either cartridge for Switch games or game disc for the Wii, PlayStation, and Xbox. Location is Chippewa video games. As mentioned, games with additional pieces will have that included in the record as well. And then we also note in the items record if it is a replacement copy or if it has been donated. Next slide, please. So call numbers and spine labels for all games start with the platform on the top line, followed by the first 3 letters of the game's title on the second line. So for example, Tchia, which is a PlayStation 4 game, it's PS4 on top, and then the second line, TCH. Sonic Frontiers is a PlayStation 5 game that we have at our library, so that's PS5 SON. Crash Bandicoot is an Xbox game, so we have Xbox on top and then CRA on the bottom. And then one of my favorite titles of a video game, Super Monkey Ball Banana Rumble, which would never fit on a spine label, is NSW for Nintendo Switch Sub. Next slide, please. And then here's just another view of our ILS of Sierra with the list of all of our Switch games. The first line is NSW, and then the second line is 3 letters of the game. And you're welcome to come back and look at these games later. Now I'll pass it on to Jeannie again.
Okay. As you saw earlier, that I had some examples of some spine labels. Here's some more examples of our spine labels. So the big part for us in general cataloging is starting by platform first, whether that be Switch, PlayStation, Xbox, and the various consoles within those, and then alphabetically by title. Try to keep that organized. Once again, our ILS kind of limits us in terms of how much text we can put on those labels. And one of the things we kind of try to do here in Clintonville is try to keep series and franchises together as much as we can. In terms of like Last of Us, we have, Last and then Last 2. Star Wars, Battlefront 1 just has Star. Battlefront 2 is Star 2, and then the Jedi games have the Jedi in the text there for the spine labels, and then the same thing for all the Just Dance games with Just, and then the year right after that. And we'll do similar things for, like, say, Legend of Zelda. Little thing we'll do differently, instead of Legend, we'll do Zelda, because I feel like that's a better title that organizes better, or at least just sticks out in terms of like what you're looking for those types of games, and add like a letter or something like that after that for, Tears or Echoes of Wisdom or something like that. But yeah, can move on to the next slide, please. So this is kind of an item look here in Carl for one of our games. We use the location code video games, and then there's a media code in there, or kind of an item type code there that's video game adult. For us, we only have one location for games, and that's kind of where the money comes from to pay for our games is adult AV, so it makes sense to use video game adult. Our system and our resource library within our system, the Appleton Public Library, both of those organizations have cataloging staff that put records into the system. So usually either the catalog is already there and we can just add an item, or if it isn't there, then we can send a request to them and they'll put a record in for us to attach our items. And the next slide, please. And then this is just a detailed record for a game in BiblioCommons, our catalog, and so it has all the different information in there that's all searchable for when you're using our catalog and such to find games. So, and I'll pass it on to Jenna.
While you're transitioning, we did have a question. If a patron reports that a game is broken, how do you test it? That is, does the library have one console of every type that they circulate?
For me, I fortunately have a few consoles of my own, and so I'll usually try to use those to help test things if possible. Or we do have some consoles in our library as well, in terms of like Switch, Wii, and an Xbox 360. So yeah.
Yep, and I'm going to cover that very shortly as well. And I made a note to talk a little bit more about it than what I planned on it. It's a really great question, so thank you. So for borrowing rules, fines, and fees, here at Chippewa Falls, we currently have them at a 1-week checkout period, but I'm advocating for 2 weeks, which will be the same as our TV shows. My director's on board, so we just need to get that happening with tech services. So even those of us who have had video game collections for a while, things will change and adapt as you go on with other collections that you probably have as well, like if you have Vox books or what have you. Patrons are able to check out 3 games per library card at a time. We have that limit in place due to our smaller collection. This helps ensure games are more available to more people. We also want to prevent one patron from borrowing too many at once, potentially losing or damaging them, and then our collection could potentially be decimated. This policy is posted on a sign by the games, it's noted on our website, and then it can also be read on a printed library information brochure. Patrons can renew games up to 2 times unless there are holds. And then also some libraries in our system do not send games out in courier. You have to go to their location to check them out and then back again to check them in. And that's just one more way that you could potentially do things depending on your policy in your library and your systems. Next slide, please. So I understand that quite a few libraries may potentially worry about damages and loss with such a high cost item. This reasoning could potentially be a barrier to beginning a video game collection. On our end, it has been minimal extra cost and minimal extra time. We've not really had an issue with theft or damaged items or missing discs and cartridges. And right now we only have 2 that are set at build status. And while I doubt we'll ever see that money from this particular patron, I do know how well loved and well used and appreciated our collection is. So a few patrons aren't going to ruin it for everyone else. And while every library story is different, I want to be very clear that for us, I truly believe that the benefits have outweighed and will continue to outweigh those additional costs and that additional time. On that note, Chippewa Falls is mostly fine-free, and we do not charge late fees for games. And most damages are handled on a case-by-case basis because it happens so infrequently. Usually a dog has chewed up a case or someone spilled soda on it, so they'll pay for the case and or for the cover art. To get to the question that was asked earlier, sometimes a disc or a cartridge will come back with a patron saying it didn't work. One of us will take the game home to test it on our personal devices. When my kids were younger, they always enjoyed that experience because they got to try out a new game too. And I'd say 99 out of 100 times it actually has worked, and it's just a patron error. Their device may have malfunctioned or something like that. Not that it has actually happened 99 or 100 times. It's very infrequent. But we also do have a switch light in the building now, so I can check switch cartridges for that. For discs that don't work, we have one of those cleaning devices. So we'll do that, and we've got a little label that we mark the date down, and then what level it was cleaned at, and then we just kind of keep track. And if it's been cleaned multiple times and it's still not working, we'll just get a new copy or withdraw it. If a patron loses a game or fails to return it on time, they are billed the full price that we paid for the game, but we do also accept a new copy if they find one with the same ISBN number. And then our director makes any final decisions on any complaints or issues or questions that patrons may have about bills or fees. And he's usually pretty reasonable. If somebody can't pay for something, we'll try and find a new way to make it work out. I'll pass the mic to Jamie now.
Okay. Here in Clintonville and within our library system, recently we moved from 1 week to 2 week checkouts for basically all media. So that's like your movies and TV shows, along with video games, which I think just, makes sense for a lot of things, especially like TV shows and some video games. A week is just not enough to really either get into it enough or finish it. So 2 weeks definitely helps out in that regard. We do have a system in place that if a title is in high demand, which we define as those items that are there are more holds than items on shelf at system libraries, it'll be given a new I-type, a short loan status, which will then change that checkout period from 2 weeks to 1 week. And basically the I-type for that is just like short loan, video games, adult, or something, or adult video games, something in that sort of combination. In terms of renewals, we allow items to be renewed up to 3 times, as long as there are no holds. And then in terms of max checkout, we have a max checkout of about 50, which is just kind of the same thing that we have for other media within our system. We don't exactly I guess advertise that too much, but if people ask me, obviously tell them like, hey, you can have 50. And majority of the time, most people don't check out that much. Maybe a few at a time. Most people are pretty reasonable with that. Um, so next slide, please. We are currently fine-free since 2021, but before that, we charged a dollar per day with a max of $5 for overdues of video games. And then in terms of replacement costs, if lost or damaged and that item cannot be checked out or used, we charge the full cost, usually just the full cost at time of purchase. But we do, as a director, I try to work out stuff with people if there's extenuating circumstances or other sorts of things that we can make it easier and such. One of the things we do as well is people can purchase their own copy of, say, hey, it's a little bit cheaper on Amazon than what you have it listed in your ILS. They can go ahead and do that as long as it's the same exact copy. Can't get a PlayStation version instead of the Switch version, which they damaged. Generally, in terms of the ILS price, I don't change it just because that price can fluctuate so much through time, and I would rather not have to try to manage that, and hopefully able to talk to the patron to make sure we can come to an agreement. If it's just something where it's not the disc or the cartridge that's damaged, if it's just the artwork of the case, we do have some just manual fees that we can just immediately assess onto an account, $2.50 for the case, $2 for the relabeling and such. Older games, if something is old enough that we can't just go out and purchase it at, say, in a Best Buy or an Amazon or something like that, probably try to just negotiate something where either we just don't charge the replacement cost because, hey, we're not going to be able to use that money to buy a replacement, or maybe just set it, tag a nominal fee or something on for damaging it or something like that. And obviously with things that get damaged or even just regular usage, cases don't last forever as they're moving between different libraries and being opened up in all sorts of places. Going to need replacement cases. And for PlayStation, Xbox, I usually just got to get general media cases through Demco, and they've always worked well for us. Switch cases are obviously a unique beast compared to PlayStation and Xbox. I have found that Nintendo of America, and then through a place called Limited Run Games that sells cases through Amazon, you can buy Switch cases, which have pretty decent prices and work out pretty well for us. So I will pass it on to Chris.
All right. So we've already walked through a lot of different stuff, right? From how you add some stuff to the ILS, cataloging, best practices, what borrowing rules you might assign with the I-type, and so much more, right? But there's then this next piece of it. So you've got your item that's shelf ready, right? Now we're talking about how you choose to display your games, where you choose to locate them, and sort of what philosophies underpin those decisions in your library. And again, reminding, Jenna mentioned this earlier, every library is different, right? Your mileage may vary, and it's important to bear in mind that you're going to know what's best for your space. But I think there are some important questions that I want to lift up here, and we're going to dig into a little bit more of maybe the philosophical pieces as to what can influence your decision as a librarian when it comes to offering your video games. One of the biggest questions, where do you choose to locate your video game collections in your library? Some libraries might look to break this up and say, well, these are more games that are geared towards children and families. I'm going to put this in the children's section. These are the teen rated games. I'm going to put these in the teen section, and these are all mature. So I'm going to put these in the adult section, right? There is, of course, a consideration for that in terms of being a librarian, helping with info seeking and browsing. You are curating these collections to be reach certain demographics of people. But I would suggest that you ask yourself why and what barriers those choices might also result in. There are some benefits, as I mentioned, there could be, but there could also be some barriers, right? For example, you put all of your children's games in the children's section. Is that going to cause a chilling effect, as I might call it, when it comes to an adult who's like, hey, I love some of these games. I want to go browse this game collection, but now it's in the children's section. I'm not sure that collection is for me now. I know as an adult, I don't necessarily want to be going browsing things in a teen section, right? There's also, of course, the consideration for accessibility concerns. I know that some libraries regrettably, will choose to put their MA-rated games on the top shelf, right? Thinking, well, kids can't reach these then and look at them. There are some, at this point, I think, obvious issues with this. If somebody is not tall, they might not be able to reach the games, even if they're an adult. That's a problem. Additionally, if somebody's like in a wheelchair or something, there's some accessibility considerations there. So what a lot of libraries choose to do, and what you saw as examples with Jamie and Jenna, we're going to show some more examples of that a little bit later too. And what I did in my library was we kept all of our games together in the adult section, and we didn't break them up into different demographics, and we didn't make choices about where on the shelf to locate them. We used a general logical system of alphabetical titles, alphabetical by title, and breaking up by console. And there's reasons that we might want to make these types of decisions. Everybody, I think at this point, or most people at this point, know that games come with a rating system. This is, I think, helpful for any librarian, especially a librarian who's not familiar with video games, to educate themselves on. There is the ESRB, the Entertainment Software Rating Board, which is a sort of a parallel to like the MPAA when it comes to movies and how films will get ratings like R or PG, that type of thing. The ESRB assigns different ratings to video games based on what they see as content descriptions that would make something E for everyone, something for teens, something for mature adult 17 plus, etc., right? Or the very rare adults only rating, which you pretty rarely see in games. Something to bear in mind here, I added a few links here, and so I'd recommend people check this out, especially if you're not familiar with video games, just so you as a librarian have an understanding of what the ESRB is and how they come to some of these determinations. But a reminder that the ESRB is a nonprofit, self-regulatory body for the video game industry. They are not a legally mandated industry that regulates how games should be offered in spaces. They do have information on their website about how they come to things like content descriptors that they'll add on the game case. And maybe this is also, I think, very valuable for you as a librarian. You might get questions about this from parents. Interactive elements that are in games, like if a game offers in-game purchases, or how users might interact with the game, if the game shares locations, etc. So these are all good things, I think, that librarians should at least be aware of in case you start to get questions from parents or families about games and content. All that being said, this does raise serious intellectual freedom concerns if a librarian was making decisions in their library about how to add things to the ILS, how to circulate things, policies regarding who can access certain things, or even in terms of how you locate and display items. This has serious intellectual freedom concerns if you're using those ESRB ratings to make those determinations. There's a few documents that I want to point towards on the ALA's website that I think are extremely valuable and really help offer you as a librarian really sound philosophical foundational ideas that can help determine what you choose to do with your video game collections. And if you got questions from like a board of trustees or something about this, these are further things you can point to. First, I want to talk about there's this document, Rating Systems and Interpretation of the Library Bill of Rights, as well as Labeling Systems and Interpretation of the Library Bill of Rights. And forgive me, but I'm going to read these couple of quotes here because I think this is important. From Rating Systems, they talk about libraries' explicit or implicit adoption, enforcement, or endorsement of any of these rating systems violates the Library Bill of Rights and may be unconstitutional if used to prevent an individual's access to materials or resources. It continues later saying that library workers should not endorse the inclusion of such rating systems. However, removing or destroying the rating placed on the original item by the publisher, distributor, or copyright holder could constitute expurgation. Then into the labeling systems and interpretation of the Library Bill of Rights, they discuss this, saying, labels as viewpoint neutral directional aids are intended to facilitate access by making it easier for users to locate resources. Great, right? However, these are different in intent from attempts to prejudice, discourage, or encourage library users to access particular library resources or to restrict access to library resources. Prejudicial labels are designed to restrict access based on a value judgment that the content, language, or themes of the resource or the background or views of the creators of the resource render it inappropriate or offensive for all or certain user groups. They also have an excellent labeling and rating systems Q&A where they offer some more different different questions that might help to guide some of your decisions with this, asking, is it appropriate to add movie, game, or music ratings to the bibliographic record? And they answer no, because these ratings are devised by private groups using subjective and changing criteria to advise people of suitability or content of materials. Is it acceptable to restrict certain sections of the collection based on a patron's age or grade level? No, again, restricting access to library materials does not respect the individual needs, interests, and abilities of patrons and violates the Library Bill of Rights. Finally, and this is one that you might get into a little bit of a sticky wicket with if you're talking with like, your library board of trustees or your city council. What if a library board is asked to use movie, video game, music, or other ratings to restrict access? And we see this happening in some states with attempts to add rating systems to books, right? Not going to talk much further about that, but none of these organizations are government agencies, and as such, their rating systems cannot be mandated or enforced by any government or agency, including a publicly funded library. Now, these are just documents and websites that you can use to inform your best practices. You can share with people when necessary to help answer questions. For my part, I linked to these on our website when it came to our video game collection, just so I had a place to point patrons towards if they had questions about this stuff. So this kind of stuff then naturally filters into how you might choose to display your collections in a library and where you're choosing to offer them. But I say, as always, no matter what, prioritize access. And those ALA documents can really help you, give you a philosophical foundation as to why you might be making these choices. I'm going to hand it over to Jenna to talk more about how they display their games.
Thank you. I see we've got a little bit of time left, so we'll go over the next stuff pretty quick and leave time for questions. So previously we had games all over the building, and it happened just because we were adding games kind of piecemeal to the collection and where we had space. That's just kind of how things worked out. But it wasn't working out. It wasn't working out for staff, and it wasn't working out for patrons. So I advocated for some change, and we rearranged a little bit, and we had some funds to purchase wire shelving that matches our adult collection, our adult media collection. So now all of the games are in one handy dandy spot, and it's great. They are separated by brand, but we don't attempt to keep them alphabetized within each section. And it's been working better for our library for a number of reasons. And we just started doing this last month. Yes, last month. So number one, all ages are interested in gaming. Having them all in one spot doesn't limit patrons based on age and ability. There are plenty of teens and adults who want ease for everybody games. And as much as we like to think that it doesn't happen, there are stigmas and judgment calls made every day about people with learning disabilities, physical handicaps, etc. So having all games in one spot helps patrons feel comfortable looking through their options. Physical accessibility and locating games in a timely fashion has been helpful for both patrons and staff, and they're right next to 2 staff desks, which is really great. Because of how we do our Switch games as well, having the fake cases readily available out front is really helpful, because every so often a young child doesn't know what to do. So we're right there to help out with that. And then on my picture here, I want to point out on the bottom, the bright green limit 3 game sign. Next slide, please. So here's a picture of the staff shelf where we keep our Switch games and also the games that are on hold from other libraries. As you can see, many are checked out. The line is mostly fake cases. So patrons will bring the pretend Switch case from the display to staff at the circulation desk. Staff will swap the cases out, and then the patron goes home with the real case with the cartridge, and then the pretend case stays behind the desk so we all know that it is checked out. Jamie, talk us through your displays.
Okay, so here's the display for our collection here in Clintonville. These are just 7 shelves that are facing our adult collection of DVDs and TV shows and all that sort of stuff. This collection has moved around the library in different places. It was in our children's area, it was in our teen area, it was on a shelf from a local video store that went out of business. And as it got bigger and the shelf kind of got in the way of things, we eventually just moved it to a different shelving unit that just worked better for keeping it organized and keeping it highlighted and such. And we obviously organize things by platform, and then within those by title and such alphabetically. We don't really think about ratings in terms of where we're shelving in stuff like that. That's not really something that comes to mind when we're doing that stuff. And we don't really have any signage currently. Not that that has hindered people from finding them. I think people are able to just find the games wherever they are, sort of thing. But then again, some signage could help direct more people to it and such. So kind of a pretty simple spot, 7 shelves. Could do a little bit more with it, sort of thing. And I'll pass it back to Jenna here to talk about checkout procedures.
Thank you. So during checkout, staff unlocks cases, then double checks the contents using the labels that we have on them. And then this is reversed at check-in. And as was previously mentioned, our switch games are kept behind the circulation desk. Patrons bring that fake case from the display to us and we swap them out. How about you, Jamie?
So as mentioned earlier, we have our discs and cartridges in the cases on the shelves. So staff are instructed to make sure that the disc and cartridge are in the case at check-in, check-out, and even when receiving them through the delivery tubs that we get every day. I like to just get that routine kind of embedded in our circulation staff to make sure that they're just always checking that, and it's just like you see a case, you open it, you make sure the stuff is in there, sort of thing. We have a self checkout in our library, and we have a sign next to it reminding patrons that, hey, please check to make sure that the disc or cartridge or whatever is in the case of the item that you're checking out and stuff. One of the things I kind of wanted to point out and be real kind of brief on it is, there's going to be some challenges for your circulation staff in making sure that what they see in the case is in the right case that it needs to be. And the example here is just there's multiple Super Mario parties and they all have Super and Mario and Party in them, and might be hard for your staff to discern which one goes in which case. And sometimes that happens with patrons too, where they end up in different cases and such if they check out multiple copies of these games and such. So next slide, please. And an example of just something that I used to do here in terms of like a little bit of security, since we have our games in the cases and we don't use the locking cases, we don't do some of that other stuff, based on cost and space and such. And one of the things I used to do is put a code that is found on the back of, like, on the left is a Nintendo DS card, on the right is a Nintendo Switch cartridge, and having that as like a check-in and check-out message that when the item is scanned in, a box will pop up that says like, hey, look for this unique code on the back of the cartridge. Staff will look at that, make sure they match, and go, okay, cool, I can check this in, check it out. Oh, they don't match? Okay, we have a problem. We need to look back and make sure, see where this item got lost, sort of thing. So this is just kind of an example of something that you could do if maybe those other things don't work out for you, and you're specifically looking at Switch cartridges being a security issue and such. We kind of stopped doing it just because it became a little bit tedious for us, and for the most part, the issue was kind of resolved and such. So yeah, and I'll pass it back on to Chris here.
Yeah, ultimately, we want to harken back to the fact that this is going to be a little bit of a different checkout process than some of the other media, right? It's going to take some onboarding for your patrons. They're going to have to get used to it. Your staff are going to have to get used to it. Like, this is an example here. We had all of our discs and all of our Switch chips behind the desk alphabetically, and people would take some time to get used to the idea of, okay, these are empty cases. Go to the library desk, get the game, etc. Staff making sure that they check to see that they have the game first, that they put the game in the case before checking it out to a patron. And then similarly, when they're checking an item in, making sure that the game has the case, that the case has the game, that they've got it all good, that it's not damaged before checking the item in, right? It takes time, but be patient. Eventually for our libraries, it becomes part of the natural operational flow, and it became no more burdensome or challenging for our patrons or our staff than any of our other media. It's just another thing for people to learn. And it's so worth the payoff of going through this process. So we added a bunch of links here. We're rounding the corner here, almost just about finished. If anybody has any questions, you can refer to these links. I know George has the slides that he'll be sharing out after the fact. And believe it or not, there's still more to come in this conversation. So we offered part 1 about selection and acquisition. This is part 2 about processing, borrowing rules, etc. That should really get you going on most of this work, but there's a few more things we want to cover that we're hoping to offer in 2025. I think we're angling towards a May date to offer this. We're going to talk about collection maintenance, like weeding best practices, managing price changes if that's something your library wants to do. And like Jenna mentioned, maybe you want to look into resurfacing your discs. How you might consider circulating video game consoles, including things like device checkout policies, documents for check-in and checkout, and testing consoles, replacements, charges. A big philosophical piece. I always love the philosophical piece of this stuff. Like I talked about the rating systems, the digitization of games and the uncertain future of video game checkouts and libraries, licensing questions and what borrowing infrastructure might exist out there, like Hoopla or Overdrive, Libby, those types of things. And then finally, things like large content downloads, allowing users to download and install content at the library if they don't have an internet connection that can do that at their home. There's also, of course, programs surrounding video games. If you were to do teen or children's or adult programs running games, we could talk so much more about video games and libraries. But I think we're going to be focusing on a lot of this stuff in part 3 next year. So now I guess we get to the Q&A portion. Thank you so much for listening to us. We still have about 9 minutes where you can ask us anything. I also do have to make sure I show this slide, which was credits. Thank you to Slides Go for lots of the stuff that we shared today. I just want to make sure that I cover my butt with that. But yeah, go ahead, ask us anything.
All right, so as Chris said, go ahead and put your questions in the chat. I will go back. I think there is only one that has not been answered yet. What do you think about noting the capability of in-game purchases in the catalog record?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, and and I also saw Samantha had an excellent question about, you know, I'm just want to lift that up too again, because I think this kind of is related to that. Samantha asked, in our system, we can catalog by rating and something is rated MA. And if something is rated MA, our juvenile account holders are not able to check them out. Are you saying we cannot do this? And similar to the in-game purchases thing, I would encourage everybody here to read thoroughly through those ALA documents. Those are also not mandates. Just like the ESRB is not a mandate in terms of the rating they give, the ALA is offering supplemental information, interpretations of the Library Bill of Rights to help librarians make what they might see as the best discretionary decisions regarding this stuff. So it's not saying that you can or you should or cannot offer information, for example, about in-game purchases when you add it to the catalog, but you might not want to for the reasons they outline in those documents for intellectual purposes, intellectual freedom purposes. Similarly to what Samantha asked about the idea that a game is cataloged as MA, and so a juvenile account holder tries to check it out and it says, no, you cannot do this. That could be an intellectual freedom issue. So I would encourage that everybody take a look at those documents and maybe consider reviewing their procedures and processes for those types of things.
Casey asks, should libraries put anything in our policies to make sure games don't get censored like books?
I think that is a terrific idea. And I think that one of the ways that you can go ahead and do that, and I encourage every library to do this, is go ahead and review your collection development policy that your library might have, as well as your checkout policies, and see if there is language that ought to be altered, edited, or fleshed out to encourage games in that conversation, but ultimately prioritizing access and prohibiting censorship based on like librarians' feelings about subject or content matter. Especially, I mean, games should also fall under, like if your library has a request for reconsideration of library materials pathway for patrons, games should fall under that as well. So these are all documents that I think policy-wise, libraries should review and determine where and how games fit into those in order to avoid things like censorship.
Good comment here from Allie that I think the subject heading for the rating wouldn't limit usage. Oh boy, the chats are coming fast. It could help folks filter their search if they choose to, but it shouldn't limit access.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sound too, Allie. It's really one of those things too, where a lot of this comes down to local control, and you all are going to know your audience best and what you might want to offer as contextual information or not. I think the most important thing is that as a librarian, you're informed, that you're informed about the ESRB, that you're informed about the ALA's feelings and thoughts about this, and that you have these conversations with your directors and with your library board of trustees if necessary.
Honey asks, is there a format or brand, I assume she means which console, that you would recommend starting with if you could only have one?
I'm going to presume that Jamie and Jenna are similar to me on this, and I would say Nintendo Switch. Nintendo Switch games circulate like gangbusters. I mean, I was even saying, so you saw Jamie had Breath of the Wild, which is like an older game at this point. The lifetime circulation was like 161 for that or something like that. So Switch games are really, really, really going to circulate well.
Yeah, and somebody mentioned what I was going to put in a chat too, that if you run a holds report, that can help you make your decision as well. You know, like we all would probably say Switch, but your location, you may have a lot of people using a different console. So I would run those reports.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Clayton asks, do we know if Switch cartridges are too small for an RFID tag to go on?
So that's a great question. I've never done an RFID tag on Switch cartridges. I don't know of an RFID tag that's small enough to go on Switch cartridges. And I will say that unlike discs, where I saw this question earlier, people asked about the hub label or an RFID label on discs, and Jenna really helpfully answered that already. But we never had problems with like RFID tags or hub labels like with PlayStation 3 or 4 or 5 discs or whatever. Switch cartridges, I'm not sure about that technology. It could be an issue. So what we did was we used the RFID donuts on our discs, but on Switch games, we just would use an RFID tag in the case. And it was one of those things where there really just isn't a functional way to add RFID directly to the chip itself.
Yeah, I would hesitate putting anything additional on a Switch game because yeah, that's a tight fit right into the game.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Not a lot of space there.
Well, if there are any other questions, feel
Ooh, I
free
see
to
this one.
type those in. I'm going to grab the link for the request form for anyone who needs an LEU.
I see here that Willis said, how can one get access codes for accessibility on games or gaming consoles? And if you could clarify what you mean by access codes, I'm just curious what you mean by that for accessibility on games or gaming consoles. Because there's a lot of great information out there about accessibility in video games and consoles and assistive technology. And those are types of things that I'd be happy to supply you with after this webinar if you want to reach out. There's a terrific person online named Steve Saylor who does things about blind and visually impaired users in gaming. I mean, there's so much different stuff. So one thing that I'd like to ask everybody in chat, if you could, I just want to see, and you can just rein this. Okay, Willis, you can reach out to me. You can rein this in chat. I just want to ask, if anybody here received professional library training, like you got your MLIS, did anybody here get any training about games collections in your MLIS? You can just put yes or no. None. Nope. No. No. Nope. No. 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 Lol. Nope. Nope. Thank you. You did, Steve. Ooh, I'm excited to talk with you, Steve. Nope. So I am very compelled by this because this is something that I think really needs to change about professional library training programs out there. And it's going to be my platform. I'm going to try to change that we get this for future librarians so that they do have some of this training. Because I think the future of libraries hinges a lot on us developing collections that meet modern interests. And it is regrettable that even to this day, many library training programs are not offering really anything about games. It shouldn't come down to us, as happy as we are, to do this, to train librarians on this and other experts in the field that are leaders in doing this. So awesome. Thanks, George. Thanks, everybody. This has been great. I'm so honored to also present along Jamie and Jenna, who are amazing, talented working librarians. Allie asks, will I present at WAPL? I might. WAPL is our Wisconsin Association of Public Libraries conference. I will be there, I'm sure, so I might end up presenting there. So. Is there a board game version of this? I don't know about board games, George. I know that there was the tabletop role-playing librarian that y'all recently did with Adam from Kentucky, which was really great. But I know there are lots of board game resources I can share with you as well, Cassie. So if you want to reach out, I can send you all sorts of links for that too. Cool.
You're
Well, I
like the
think this is
wizard of
it.
links.
Yes, I know I have so many links I can share. I can share everything. Well, I think that is everything. So thank you, everybody. Feel free to reach out to any one of us. And yeah, stay groovy, my friends. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye. Thank you.